My name is Mark Hardingham. I'm the chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council. AFSA conferences are a really important part of the kind of national scenery around fire and rescue services. I think this is must be fifth or sixth conference I've been to over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. Every time I come here, I see a conference with 250 to 300 people in the audience, who is as diverse an audience, representative of all four corners of fire and rescue services right across the UK. So I think it's a unique conference. I think the quality of the internal to fire, but also the external speakers that AFSA are able to bring sets us in a really good stead for how we want to improve equality, inclusion, diversity across fire services. Well, I've been really clear that values, culture, equality and inclusion is my number one priority as the chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council. We ran, with support from AFSA and other networks and national partners, our own culture and inclusion conference in about March this year, and that was the catalyst for us publishing the NFCC Culture and Inclusion Plan. The reason I say it's our number one priority is because it rolls into everything else that we do across every fire and rescue service in the country. So the NFCC Culture Plan, what I would say about it at the start, whilst it's the NFCC's Culture Action Plan, there isn't a part of the fire and rescue service that wasn't engaged in its development. So AFSA, Women in the Fire Service, employers, government, fire and rescue services, trade unions, representative bodies, everybody had an opportunity to contribute into the plan. And the plan's got 22 deliverables. And I won't go through all of those, but it includes things like the leadership programs that the NFCC run at supervisory, middle and executive level, making sure that inclusion, values, cultures, behaviour is written large through those programs. We're producing toolkits around how do you challenge inappropriate behaviour in fire services. We're interested in developing performance dashboards. So how do you as a fire and rescue service, and equally nationally, measure culture in a fire and rescue service so you're able to evidence where you're making improvements, but equally you're able to see clearly some areas where you're not making the necessary improvements. And then there's a whole range of other areas where we think we can provide products into fire and rescue services to help them in the leadership challenge they have to be more inclusive fire and rescue services. So if you're a firefighter and you want to see the NFCC Culture Plan, then you go on the NFCC's website. If you just Google NFCC the website's fairly intuitive, you'll quickly find the Culture Plan. It's about a 8 or 9 page document, something like that, so it's quite easy to engage with. And then there are a number of things that are there in support of the plan as well. So things like, as the NFCC, we've published our own culture statement, which talks about zero tolerance from a national perspective, and there's other pieces in there as well. So it's a fantastic question, and I think this is something that nationally and individually fire and rescue services and other organisations are wrestling with at the moment. So there's two things from my perspective. One is that we've established an independent expert advisory panel chaired by Anthea Sully, who's the Chief Exec of the White Ribbon UK, who spoke at the AFSA conference earlier on this year. She's the chair of our panel. We've also got about 6 or 7 members of the panel who are from outside of fire and rescue services, men and women and people from different ethnic backgrounds, from a wide range of organisations, private, public, voluntary and community sector, and academia as well. And we're using them as a panel that can hold us to account for delivering against the culture plan. You then get into things like what sort of indicators can you use to check progress that's being made. So there are the typical indicators like what's the demographic of your workforce? How many women do you employ? How many black people do you employ? But I think it needs to be more detailed than that when you start to talk about retention of people in the workforce, but also progression of people up to and into the most senior roles in fire and rescue services as well. And then you've got some of the softer intelligence where services either nationally or locally are doing things like culture surveys, staff engagement, looking at absence and turnover rates, looking at discipline and grievance, and looking at all of those both collectively, but also breaking it down so you look at it from the perspective of diversity and inclusion as well.